God forbid that Hillary would have won. But first of all, Trump has no philosophical core. He's not a libertarian. He's actually an authoritarian. His philosophical approach to things is classical fascist. I'm afraid that he might get us involved in a serious war with China, or he's not getting out of the Middle East.
Hey friends, thanks so much for joining us. It's my great honor to have back on the line Doug Casey, founder of Casey Research. He's also an author. He has a new book out called Speculator. It's a novel. We're going to talk about that. And in July, he has another book coming out called Drug Lord. Doug Casey, thanks so much for joining us.
Well, it's my pleasure, Sean. I'm speaking to you today from lovely Buenos Aires, Argentina, where I spend a lot of time.
You know, I actually have that on my list of questions for you. I want to ask you about living in Argentina for those of us who are trapped here in the United States, a country I very much love, but a government that I do have some issues with. Glad to see Trump in there trying to drain the swamp. We'll talk about that as well. Love to get your ideas on whether or not he's making progress. But just to kick things off, Doug, let me read this entry to you from Wikipedia about the United States debt ceiling. It won't take long. Here it comes. On October 7th, 2013, Treasury indicated that the debt ceiling and extraordinary measures will be exhausted and that a default will occur on October 17th when interest payments are due. The debt ceiling would again have been reached on November 3rd, 2015. On October 30th, 2015, the debt ceiling was again suspended to March 2017. We're sitting in April now, Doug. The debt ceiling has been reached. How much longer can this Ponzi scheme continue?
You know, it's funny. This has been going on for my whole lifetime. And people have been worried about the national debt for decades. Now, can it go on forever? That's the real question. The answer to that is no, because it's expanding at a rate that the debt will equal the known universe if it goes on at this rate for long enough. So anything that can't go on won't go on. I'm of the opinion that we've finally reached the end of the rope this cycle. But listen, I've become a perma-bear. I mean, because my feeling is that Western civilization itself has been declining at an accelerating rate since about 1914. So perhaps I'm the wrong person to ask, but no, they'll raise the debt ceiling, 20 trillion, 25 trillion. I don't know where the breaking point is. I think the answer is actually with interest rates more than the number of dollars. You know the old saying, I'll give you the price you want if you give me the terms that I want. It's pretty much like that with the national debt. So when interest rates go back up to a more normal, quote-unquote, level, at that point, interest payments alone are going to exceed the entire tax revenue of the U.S. government.
Right.
So, no, it's serious, but there are more serious things at the moment.
Now, the central bank, the Federal Reserve, can manipulate those interest rates higher. I mean, it's funny to see that under Obama, all they did was lower the rates. Under Trump, they're raising the rates. They could quickly get us into a scenario where a default on the debt becomes almost impossible to avoid. And I was listening to your interview recently with Greg Hunter, in which you said that you hope he pulls the plug on the debt. You hope Trump defaults because we need a reset. Can you flesh that out for us? And how ugly does that look for our standard of living if the United States government, if the Treasury defaults on the debt?
Well, look, I advocate the Treasury defaulting on the debt, and this shocks people. But let me tell you why. First of all, that debt is owed by some people to some other people. And if it's ever going to be repaid, it means that future generations of U.S. citizens are going to be turned into indentured servants in order to pay it back. So I don't see why future generations of Americans should be saddled with the profligacy of their fathers and grandfathers. So yes, it should be defaulted on for that moral reason. There's another moral reason it should be defaulted on. It's that most of that, I believe in punishing the people that have made it possible for the U.S. government to expand to the degree it has. So I think that they ought to be punished. for having lent that money to the government. And will it be a disaster economically? Well, look at it this way. All of the real wealth in the world, the technologies, the buildings, things of this nature, they're still going to exist. It's just that the people that own that government debt are going to be wiped out. But as I said, I think that's a good thing, believe it or not.
Well, I definitely agree that there needs to be a reset. This can't continue. I mean, let me ask you this. Can this current situation go on ad nauseum when we see China and Russia actively moving away from the dollar, right? I'll read this to you from Zero Hedge. Moscow and Beijing join forces to bypass U.S. dollar and global markets, shift to gold trade. Now, what I find interesting about this, and I just discussed it with my friend Andy Hoffman the other day, is that according to this article, the Russian central bank opened its first overseas office in Beijing on March 14th, marking a step forward in forging a Beijing-Moscow alliance to bypass the U.S. dollar in the global monetary system and to phase in a gold-backed standard of trade. Now, Doug, my question to you is this. Are they merely calling our bluff, the bluff of the U.S. government? Because there's no way the U.S. government can engage in any sort of gold-backed standard of trade.
No, it can't, obviously, because the major export of the U.S. for the last couple of generations has been U.S. dollars, and it's been a wonderful trade. We send those nice foreigners paper money or accounting credits called U.S. dollars, and they send us all kinds of wonderful things, Mercedes and Sonys and cocaine and who knows all the other things. But so we've been exporting paper in exchange for real goods. That's going to come to an end someday, and someday, I think fairly soon, those dollars are going to start flooding back into the U.S. in exchange for the titles to U.S. corporations, U.S. land, this type of thing. But I've said for many years, actually, that it was inevitable that somebody was going to, some government, it started with, in recent times, with Muhammad Mahathir in Malaysia, where he tried to reinstitute the gold dinar, which is, Muslims tend to take their religions much more seriously than Christians do. And the Quran says that's what you're supposed to use is the gold dinar. But the Chinese and the Russians, right now, they have to trade with each other using dollars clearing through New York. It's completely insane that they'd be doing this. So yes, they're going to go back to gold because they don't trust each other's currencies either. The whole world is going to go back to gold. This is inevitable.
Well, now let me ask you this, and I should point this out for folks. We're not, as you guys know, we're not doing a video interview, but your icon here on Skype is V. From the movie V for Vendetta, anonymous essentially. And, you're such a straight shooter because you'll tell people like it is, right? It's painful to hear that the U.S. government needs to default, right? It's going to be painful to go through it. But as you just said, our forefathers warned us, if we allow the central bank to continue, the Federal Reserve, if we allow these bankers to print money out of existence, right, for their own benefit essentially, then our sons will wake up homeless in the country their forefathers conquered. And that seems to be exactly where we're going to go, right? They're going to own all of the buildings and all of the land, and they're going to own it all. And when this fiat system under which we live now goes away and the U.S. dollar is no longer the world's reserve currency, those listening who don't have physical gold and physical silver and other assets, hard assets, are going to be penniless in the nation their forefathers conquered.
Yes, that is the way it's going. But that's the way all empires go. It's inevitable, I think, for a lot of very good historical reasons. The average American now is overweight, undereducated, generally degraded, spoiled. The ones that go off to college, and of course almost everybody does these days, in addition to what the U.S. government is doing to his balance sheet, he's indebting himself to have his mind filled with ridiculous and counterproductive ideas. So at this point, I don't have much sympathy for the average American. And I've got to say this, the United States is one thing, but America is something else. And the idea of America has been banished from the geographical area called the United States. They're two different things. It's just as The US government is a totally different thing from America, the country. So things are changing.
Now, let me ask you this. As far as Donald Trump goes, he's promised to drain the swamp, but it seems to me the deep state is opposing him at every turn. What do you make of his chances to actually be able to drain the swamp that so badly needs to be drained?
I'd say slim and none, and slim's out of town. First of all, Donald, first of all, I had money bets with people like Marin Katusa that Donald was going to win the election, and I'm very glad he won the election. God forbid that Hillary would have won. But first of all, Trump has no philosophical core, so he's not a libertarian. He's actually an authoritarian. His philosophical approach to things is classical fascist, which is a word which is misused, and I don't want to go into that whole thing now, but half the things he does are destructive and stupid. I'm afraid that he might get us involved in a serious war with China, or he's not getting out of the Middle East. Look, it's a cultural thing more than anything else with Trump. These people that are in and around and support and like the deep state, the Democratic Party, Hillary, progressives, cultural Marxists, academics, all these things, they hate Trump viscerally. But it's not just hating Trump. They hate the people in flyover country, in those red counties in the middle. So at this point, we're actually on the ragged edge of a civil war in the US. This is really, really serious. I've never seen anything quite like this in my lifetime. Not even the stuff that happened in the late 60s and the early 70s was anything like this. Yeah. So this is really serious stuff.
Yeah, I sort of feel the same way. I think that we're seeing a lot of it, personally, I believe, fostered by NGOs, by Soros-based foundations. There's definitely I've never seen the country more divided, let's put it that way. You know, the people that were delusional enough to think that Hillary Clinton was a viable candidate and not a criminal, those people and us, never shall the two meet. There's no way we can bridge the gap between that type of thinking and libertarian-minded people that want less government, honest government, which my friend G. Edward Griffin says is an oxymoron. There's no such thing as honest government. But I've never seen the divide so big. I mean, it really is stunning. And it feels like the powers that be, the George Soros folks and people like that, the Clinton Foundation, Obama, his network, they're pitting both sides against each other on purpose.
You're absolutely correct. And this is a very visceral, deep-seated thing. These people hate each other. It's not just a question of political disagreement. It's actually hatred. And it's got to end very badly. But, I don't believe that the country should be united either. You can't unite 300 million people. Unite them for what? On the lowest common denominator? None of them believe in basic so-called American values anymore. That's been washed away for decades. So forget about uniting the country. Actually, the only solution to this is that the U.S. break up into many little countries. My ideal is it breaks up into 300 million little countries. But at least initially, from a cultural point of view, the U.S. should be at least 5 or 10 or 20 different countries. In fact, I'll go further than that. I think that the Constitution of 1789 was a huge mistake. The world and the U.S. and individuals would all be better off if it had stayed 13 colonies and expanded from there. Mm-hmm. But that's another question that I think most people would argue with and think I'm wrong.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I mean, I would go as far to say that we should have 50 different countries, right? And probably more than 50 because California should be broken into 4 or 5 countries.
Exactly.
Let the liberals in Sacramento have their own little hellhole and then free the rest of the right-minded people.
Yeah, no, exactly correct. And don't forget, I spend most of the year outside the U.S. at this point because I find that I have more personal freedom, a much lower cost of living, more opportunity. And it's just generally more pleasant. And I don't have to worry about some SWAT team knocking down my door at 3 a.m. It's funny. People used to say, that only happened in the Soviet Union or Nazi Germany, but it's happening in the US now. I don't like going back to the US anymore, quite frankly.
Yeah. Well, more and more, I'm starting to feel the same way, and I feel a little stuck here, but that could be remedied. I feel like if the American people had risen up a long time ago, we could have thrown off these chains of tyranny that they rolled out long before 9/11. But of course, since 9/11, everything, all of this tyranny, the Patriot Act, the National Defense Authorization Act, all of these tyrannical policies have been rolled out on the back of 9/11. And so it breaks my heart to watch this happen. Doug, I've taken so much of your time here.
I would just say one more thing. It's that, but you've got to understand, I think, that people like you and me are almost like genetic mutants.
I feel
The
that
average
some way. Yeah.
American supports this stuff.
That's my feeling too. Sometimes I feel like there's something genetic in my makeup that makes me different from the majority of the people. Because with most folks, I cannot have this conversation that you and I have just had. The listeners listening can have it, right? But I mean, we're the less than 2%, I swear to God. And it's, well, maybe that's changing. Maybe it's the less than 20%, because there are a lot of pissed off people in this country, which is why Hillary the criminal did not get into the White House. So I want to just leave you with some time here to talk about your newest book, Speculator. And then if you want, give us a teaser on the new book coming out in July called Drug Lord.
Well, I feel that there are certain things that you're much better saying in the form of fiction than nonfiction. In addition to the fact that people that will read novels are a different group of people than tend to read nonfiction. So I'm doing a series of 7 novels with my co-author, Dr. John Hunt. We start off on a rather shallow gradient, speculator, which goes into the theories of speculation and gold. And our hero, Charles Knight, gets involved in a revolution in Africa, which is something that I've always been interested in anyway. And then in this next novel, which is coming out in July, called Drug Lord, he gets into the drug business. We talk about the legal and illegal drug business. And then it gets more radical from there. Our next novel is Assassin, where we talk about the techniques and the history and the morality of assassination. And then the next 4 novels after that get very radical. So I urge people not to fall behind and get a copy of Speculator. You can get it on Amazon, or you can get an autographed hardback at highgroundnovels.com.
All right. Well, guys, get your autographed copy of Speculator from, what is it, highgroundnovels.com?
Indeed.
Very cool. Doug, you've been very generous with your time, as usual. Haven't spoken with you since October of 2016, so hope to talk with you again in the future, and we'll keep an eye on things as they inevitably collapse. And you may be our emergency call to Argentina, because you'll be offshore when all of this ugliness happens. Our guest has been Doug Casey of Casey Research. Doug, thank you so much.
My pleasure, Sean. Thank you.
Thank you. And guys, thanks so much for tuning in. You know how much I appreciate your support. And for all my patrons over at Patreon, thank you for giving us a safety net as Google turns off the ability to advertise for those of us who cover challenging content. You guys mean the world to me. Check us out at sgtreport.com for real news 24/7. God bless.
The debt is exploding. The currencies are serially collapsing. Between the overpopulation, the demographics, the debt, there's just no way out of this other than to hyperinflate, which is going to push people out of fiat currencies and into precious metals to preserve their wealth.